Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. Whether you're a long-time listener or a first-time listener, I appreciate you tuning in to today's episode featuring the illustrious John Logan returning to the podcast, and I can't wait to dive into it. We're going to break down our top 5 favorite Dark Shadows storylines. But before we get to the show, I want to remind you that voting is still going on for the Rondo Hatton Classic Horror Awards, and you have until April 20th at midnight to submit your votes, and Terror at Collinwood has been nominated for Best Podcast in the Rondo Awards. Dark Shadows is represented in the Rondo Awards in addition to Terror at Collinwood. The great Nick D, with Dark Shadows cast members and directed by Ansel Faraj, has been nominated for Best Independent Film. Jeff Thompson was interviewed by Mickey Gunter in Wonder number 18, and hey, Penny Dreadful was interviewed by Diana Robertson in Ghastly Phantasms number 19. So send your votes in. You can vote in as many or in as few categories as you like. You can check out the full ballot at rondoaward.com, and you send your votes in to taraco, T-A-R-A-C-O, at AOL.com, and be sure to include your name in the email when you vote. And I do want to apologize because in the last episode I did a rundown of all the previous Terror at Collinwood guests who were nominated in this year's Rondo Awards, and I missed the name Ricardo Delgado, and how could I miss Ricardo's name? I had a great time chatting with him, and he's brilliant. Ricardo Delgado's Dracula of Transylvania is nominated in the Best Graphic Arts Presentation category. So Ricardo, if you're listening, I do sincerely apologize for not mentioning your name last time. I was scanning through the ballot quickly, and I should have double-checked that first. So Ricardo, congratulations on your nomination. Also nominated in that category is Sam Irvin for Captain Samouflage and the Franken Sam Scam. So two great former guests over here at Terror at Collinwood and very notable creators in the entertainment industry there who have been nominated in the Rondo Awards. On to other news, the wonderful Guy Haynes reminded me that our own Sarah Collins, Sharon Smith Lentz, is a grandmother. Her granddaughter, Sylvia, was born on February 28th. So congratulations to Sharon and her family. I want to remind you once again that the Lyndhurst Dark Shadows event is happening on July 19th and 20th. The weekend will include meet and greet sessions on Saturday and Sunday, both morning and afternoon, and in attendance will be Catherine Lee Scott, Marie Wallace, Sharon Smith Lentz, and possibly other guests, maybe even David Hennessy, who knows? You never know. The cost for the meet and greet is $40. There will also be a Champagne at Collinwood event on Saturday evening, which I believe is sold out at this point, alas, but keep an eye in case anything opens up. There'll be photo opportunities, there'll be props and furnishings. It's going to be a great event, and I look forward to seeing you there. I will be there, so if you see me, come on over and say hello. I will have some Terror at Collinwood postcards and stickers, and I will hook you up with those if you want them. Continuing on here, I want to let you know once again that Bob Issel is accepting submissions for the Our Shadowed Past Volume 3 book. The Our Shadowed Past book series features fan memories of Dark Shadows. Volume 3 will also contain excerpts of an exclusive 2024 interview that Bob conducted with Joanna Going, who played Victoria Winters and Josette in the 1991 Dark Shadows. For those interested in contributing your memories, a chapter, short story, festival memory, artwork, etc. for Volume 3, the deadline to do so is July 15th, 2025. If you'd like more information, or if you'd like guidelines, or if you'd like to contribute to the book, just drop an email to Bob over at bobubas59@gmail.com. That's BOBUBAS59@gmail.com. And with that said, let's get to the show. There's nowhere to run, there's no place to hide. This podcast is fun, but there are spoilers inside. Welcome to the strange and disturbing world of terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Penny Dreadful, and I am delighted to be joined once again by the one and only John Logan, Oscar-nominated, Tony Award and Golden Globe-winning playwright, screenwriter, and producer. He's back, and we're here to discuss the top 5 Dark Shadows storylines and many other things. He is known for his work as a screenwriter for such films as Ridley Scott's Gladiator, Martin Scorsese's The Aviator and Hugo, Tim Burton's Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, and Sam Mendes' James Bond films Skyfall and Spectre. He is the creator of Showtime's Penny Dreadful, and he's back to break down our top 5 Dark Shadows storylines. Welcome back to the show, John.
Thank you. Thrilled to be back.
Oh my goodness, it's a joy to have you back again and a pleasure. How have you been?
I've been good. I mean, it's been a challenging time in Southern California, because we had you start the year thinking this is going to be the best 2025, best year ever.
Yeah,
And then the Malibu fires happened.
yeah,
And I've been a Californian all my life. And so I've lived through the threat of wildfires. I've been evacuated 4 times. But this was the one. This was, the fire swept through, burnt our entire house, every
yeah.
single thing, I own, 63 years of life just gone in an afternoon. And it was devastating, because it was my home, it was my office where I worked. It was like everything that I wrote started there. It's where all my collectibles were, it's all my Dark Shadow stuff. So it was shocking, just to realize that there's sort of what was your life is now scorched earth. And everyone I know who lost their houses said, they had to find some solace. And my solace was Dark Shadows, as it always has been. First thing I did, first thing I did is I ordered a Barnabas cane. I'm like, I need to have the things around me that bring me pleasure, that put me in touch with the little boy who fell in love with imagination. And I started watching again, just straight through all the time, And so for me, for you, for so many people, yeah, Dark Shadows is nostalgia, but it also is a place, a very safe place where you're entertained, you're provoked, you're thrilled, you're challenged, and it's what I desperately needed. And nothing else would do it. My husband was like, "Great, you watch 10 episodes in a row. Go." You know. And so it was very moving for me to get into it. And of course, I haven't stopped, and I'm delighted we're talking. And now, we're rebuilding. It's just the process that everyone is going through.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that happened, and I'm so happy for you that you've rebounded and have been able to rebuild. And you've sent me pictures of your collection as you've started rebuilding it, and you were sending me texts telling me about how you're enjoying. You were revisiting the Leviathans and
Yeah.
Parallel Time, and Dark Shadows is such a wonderful escape. It could be a town in Maine, but it's so disconnected in a way too. It's just this strange other world that you can go to where the awful stuff that happens in the real world doesn't exist. They don't
Yeah.
really reference anything like that's, awful things that happen in Collinsport, like, vampires and stuff. But I don't know, it's just such a wonderful escape from all of that and stimulates our imaginations.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you were able to do that and find solace in Dark Shadows like so
Yeah.
many others have.
There's probably something very telling psychologically that I picked Leviathans to start with. I could have started like with Kitty Hampshire, I could have started anywhere, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel that Leviathans is my life right now. So
You know
I
what?
must
That's
conquer the Naga box
yeah.
of my life.
You were kind enough to send me a couple of pictures of your collection, so I want to definitely show those off as you've been rebuilding it. Not only with Dark Shadows stuff, but some other cool classic horror stuff. Speaking of classic horror, you've written some great stuff this past year. Wrote a great piece about Martine Beswick this past year, and you got to hang out with Martine Beswick, the legendary actress. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, like my sort of great loves are Dark Shadows and Hammer Horror.
Hmm.
And I just like both of those touch something in me that I adore. And I happened to watch Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde,
Uh-huh.
you know, like a couple of years ago, and I was so struck by the gender issues, by how provocative it was for the year it was made, and
Yeah.
particularly by Martine Bezic. Like her
Mm-hmm.
performance is just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went on, as you do, like a deep dive. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna watch every single thing she made, which she did. It was a lot. And I was so impressed. I wanted to write something about it. And I don't write prose. It's very hard for me to write prose. I'm a dramatist. I write characters yapping.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote this piece that the Hollywood Reporter published just in praise of her and her legacy and how she should be recognized and celebrated even more than she is, and how her mixed race heritage worked against her in certain ways. And our friend Sam Irvin, said, "Oh, well, I know Martine." I was like, "Oh, could you send it to her?" And she loved it. And we finally had dinner there at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills. And it was everything you'd want it to be. It was like meeting a hero, meeting one of those people. It was
That's
like
so
me
cool.
meeting like Nancy Barrett. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I just don't know what to say because it's so cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my goodness. Wonderful. Nancy Barrett, man, I would love to meet her someday too. Like, wouldn't that be cool? She's amazing. Like
Amazing.
anything she did in Dark Shadows was just pure gold. But yeah, very cool. Speaking of let's talk about we're chatting about some topics maybe we could talk about in this episode. And we settled on talking about our top five Dark Shadows storylines, which is a challenge to kind of come up with those. For me, it was I had in mind what I wanted, what I had. I guess the bottom three, I knew what those were going to be. The top two kind of fought it out a little bit, but I settled on my top five. I don't know about you. Was this difficult for you?
For me, it was the top three were easy. It was fighting for fourth and fifth position.
I see. Okay.
There's so much I love, and it's like, how can I not have Carolyn dancing at the Blue Whale, or how can I do this? But finally, it's like, okay, this is it. I will live with these choices.
Okay, okay. All right. So folks, are you right now? Just because I'm gonna preface this by saying just because obviously we can't include every Dark Shadows storyline. It doesn't mean I personally I love all the Dark Shadows storylines. I'm one of those people like I love all of them. I love some more than others, however. But just to kind of give an idea of what we're talking about here, it can get a little confusing when we talk about what is a Dark Shadows storyline, because so we have these the fandom, I guess, or just generally speaking, if you look at the Catherine Lee Scott Pomegranate Press books, or just the fanzines over the years in general, it's kind of broken down into 14 what they call storylines. So we have Victoria Winter's Search slash Burke Devlin's Revenge is the first storyline. We have Laura the Phoenix is the second. Introduction of Barnabas Collins slash Jason McGuire Blackmail. Then we have the 1795 storyline, The Creation of Adam and Eve slash The Dream Curse, The Werewolf slash The Ghost of Quentin Collins, The Return to 1796, which is only 2 weeks, but it's sort of a separate, distinct thing. The 1897 storyline, The Leviathans, 1970 Parallel Time, the 1995 Flash Forward, which is again only 2 weeks, the Summer of 1970 storyline, which is the Gerard and Daphne haunting, the 1840 storyline, and 1841 Parallel Time. And within those 14 stories, we have other plots, going on at the same time. So, obviously 1897 is a very long storyline. So you have Laura the Phoenix going on, you have Dirk Wilkins Vampire going on, you have Count Patofi, you have lots of different things happening. So the fandom tends to just kind of have these 14 storylines as the designation for these specific stories. So that's kind of what we're using here to what we're calling storylines. And within those, there are various different plot lines going on. So, with that said, let's just dive into this. So, John, what is drum roll? What is your number five?
My number five, perhaps a controversial choice of some people, is 1840.
Interesting. Oh, cool.
1840. And people sort of the confused wisdom is like, oh, Dark Shadows was on the way out then. I'm like, you know what? Any bit of narrative that has the head of Judah Zachary is not on the downward slide. And we've discussed before, it's like when the head of Judah Zachary appeared, I thought they literally are making the show for me because it's such a strange, unusual idea and they carry it through so well. in 1840 has the real emergence of Gerard in a great way. And I think James Storm is phenomenal. He's got one of those faces, like Thayer David, like Nancy Barrett, like Laura Parker, that just holds a close up.
Mhm.
Some actors like David Selby or Chris Pennick, or you want to see air around them. But the way that James Storm just holds that close up is amazing to me. And it's also one of the storylines that dials into the sort of, if you will, soap opera of it with like non-supernatural things. It's like the sort of Samantha, Quentin, Gerard triangle. Like
Mhm.
how is this going to end? And there are moments that are so magnificent. I think of the door opening and Quentin walks in and says, "I'm back, I'm not dead." That just, you sort of gasp. And, I think narrative television is made to make you gasp, is to make
Mhm.
you go, "Oh, I didn't expect that." And to me, this storyline is filled with so much of that. And then it goes into sort of the deep, deep dive of reincarnated Miranda Duval Angelique
Yeah.
and how that relates to like the initial stages of cursing that continues through the bloodline, I think is fascinating stuff. And I'll talk about Laura Parker a lot later with something else, but I just find it always exciting, always interesting, and intriguing in a mysterious way. So I'm away 1840.
Great choice. I love 1840. And I love one other thing I love about 1840 is in the beginning, Julia is the one who makes it to 1840 before Barnabas does. And we see old Ben Stokes,
Yeah.
and she befriends Ben and convinces him to help her let Barnabas out of the coffin, much to his, reluctance. And he does and help her let Barnabas out of the coffin. And Barnabas has not used the I Ching yet to go back in time, so he has no idea who Julia is. So we get 1795 Barnabas back, which is kind of fun to
Yeah.
see a Barnabas who has no idea who Julia is at this point. So that was kind of fun. And you do get that origin story for Angelique. After all those years, you get something with the Miranda Duval and the whole witch trial. And yeah, Judah Zachary was such a really cool idea. I love Gerard. I love that whole dynamic with Gerard, Quentin, and Samantha. Just cutting in real quick here. While we were talking, I made a mental note to mention Christopher Pennock's Gabriel, and then John and I were texting after the episode, and John mentioned that Gabriel is, in his opinion, Christopher Pennock's greatest role in the show. And I'd be hard pressed to disagree with that. He was so wonderful with his acerbic personality in the wheelchair, with his machinations, as John said in the text. And I love him in all his roles. I really enjoyed him as Jeb and Cyrus Longworth and John Yeager too. But yeah, Gabriel is probably his masterpiece, I think, in Dark Shadows, and definitely an important part of 1840 as well. All of it, it's
Yeah.
just fun. It has an interesting vibe to it. And it's,
Yeah, it does. It's a very unique vibe too, because
yes.
it's some of it is so comedy of manners. I mean, like, I
Mhm.
think Flora is maybe my favorite Joan Bennett performance.
Yeah.
It's so like unexpected. You could tell she really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
The other thing about sort of 1840 is the ending. It's like
Mhm.
it is a bloodbath. It's like
Yeah.
Titus Andronicus with more characters on that soundstage you've ever seen, and everyone's killing everyone else. And then I want to ask you, what do you think of that amazing moment when Angelique is dying and Barnabas sort of confesses love to her?
I honestly, I thought it was heartbreaking. Personally, I thought it was. Now, okay, a lot of people hate that scene because of what Angelique did to Barnabas's family in 1795. But I honestly, I can see that trajectory happening. I mean, it's just they've been. I always say they're kind of almost two sides of the same coin in a way. The two of them. I don't think they should. I know this whole shipping thing, who should be with who. I don't buy into that with I think I've always said, Barnabas, honestly, I agree with Danny Horn. I don't agree with everything Danny Horn says, but I agree in that why do we think Barnabas should be with anyone? I think Barnabas and Angelique would implode probably within a week of being together, but it does make sense. There is a draw there between the two of them. Magda said those two, they deserve each other. And I think that's it. This is her first kind of real this is a selfless act on her part,
Yeah.
and Barnabas sees that. Of course, Barnabas is also very impulsive. you know he you you know yes, it makes sense until the next Josette lookalike shows up,
It-
and then all
exactly.
bets are off, so
It-
you know how Barnabas rolls, so
Yeah, yeah, and it's like it's when you when he's like watching like sleeping Roxanne in that storyline, and he's like, I fell in love with her instantly while she's there, not even breathing
yes,
practically.
yes,
You're just like
exactly.
Barnabas, come on. But also
Exactly.
the other thing about Barnabas and Angelique, and why I think that's like such an eternal couple, as Magda said, they do deserve each other. Both of them, if you look at the whole sweep of the narrative, it's like they're both good and bad. They're both
Yes.
pulled in different directions. And so like, I'm here with Sky. I'm married. This is what I want. I don't want to be a witch, And Barnabas is constantly fighting against sort of the primal nature of his thing. So, of all the characters, they are the most, to me, the most continually complicated.
Yes.
So the dance between them is always, it's like two scorpions in a bottle, and yet they belong together.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so difficult to write those characters. I've found in licensed media a lot of the time people have it because they tend to make Angelique this very one-dimensional villain, vengeance machine, and there's way more to the character than that. And same with Barnabas. You can't write him as purely a villain or purely a hero. Complicated is the exact word for both of them. And Jonathan Fred always used to say, I like playing between two poles. I like playing into the gray areas. And Angelique, of course, they was horrible. She did horrible things.
Oh
So
yeah.
did Barnabas too. But they also could do selfless things, like in 1897 when she's trying to
Yeah.
she expresses concern for David Collins, who she remembers as Cassandra in the future. And Barnabas was kind of dubious at first. She says, "Remember, I knew David as Cassandra." She seems to show some compassion there. That's when you start to see, I think, a different side of that character. And yeah, complicated. It's definitely. How do you feel about that scene in 1840? Out of curiosity.
Well, I tend to blindly accept everything. I'm like the master storytellers are telling me a great tale, and it's like a myth and a legend, and
Yeah,
I believe it.
yeah,
And it's surprising, but not surprising to me. To me, it's
mhm,
almost inevitable.
yeah,
That sooner or later, at some point in Barnabas's existence, he would realize there's an eternal mate here, for better or ill, and
mhm,
it's got to be her.
yeah. I agree, but I still think it would implode because if I were to look into the future and let's say Angelique comes back, because she does that. She comes back, she reunites with Barnabas in the present day. Barnabas tries to find Angelique. He finds her, she shows up in the present. If given Angelique's nature, I think if somebody showed up, or if Maggie Evans comes out of Wincliffe and she's around, I think Angelique would start pulling some shenanigans. And I suspect things would start to fall apart because it's just what happens. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't.
I agree. But also that's what would make it fascinating to watch. Because I remember
Oh, sure.
who wrote like, there's nothing more boring than happy people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
So like, and
Indeed.
I don't want to watch boring TV. So
Yeah,
like,
yes.
get together, think you're in love, and then watch the new
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So next, my number five is 1995, which is a very short period of time. It's only 2 weeks, but what a devastating 2 weeks that is. Talk about a nihilistic story is just. I mean, it's setting up summer 1970 and 1840, but wow, so impactful coming out of uh, parallel time 1970. We've been there for a few months, and we kind of want to see our Collins family again and the main time band, and we do, but it's in the future. Collinwood is destroyed. And I remember seeing that for the first time and just being absolutely shocked to
Me
see
too.
that. Yeah,
Me too.
it's shocking because you love Collinwood. It's like it's kind of like your home away from home. It's your happy place, as we were talking about before, and it's in ruins, right? And even the opening shot for all of those episodes for the narration segment, it's always this like grim kind of shot of Collinwood from a different angle that we haven't seen before. This kind of grayish shot of Collinwood. The whole thing is really gloomy, and you do see, Carolyn is insane. Professor Stokes is a broken man. Mrs. Johnson is more terrified than she usually is, with the gray hair. It's just David's dead. I mean, everybody's dead. And we don't, it's this sort of like, what the heck happened here kind of a thing, setting up this great mystery. And We've never been to the future before in Dark Shadows, so it's something new and exciting. It's just amazing to me that they would always come up with these really innovative and exciting and interesting ideas that were kind of groundbreaking, just it's just something that talk about not only on daytime television, but just in general. It's just kind of unheard of, this daily serial where they're just, let's do this, let's go to the future and have Collinwood destroyed after all these years. It was really cool. I love 1995, even though it's only 2 weeks. It's just this like ice pick that you get to the to the heart watching
I,
that.
I'm with you. 1995 is my number four, in fact.
Oh,
And
great.
I love it to pieces. And first of all, let's talk about Cy Tomashoff,
Yes.
because, we're used to seeing, as you say, that pristine
Hmm.
column with different arrows. And he came in with his crew and destroyed it in a way that's very believable and so jarring to our expectations of what Collinwood is and should be. And so the visual look of 1995, I think, is the best of anything in the show, just in terms of like it's evocative, the way they shoot through things to show the destruction of this whole sort of landscape, the whole sort of biosystem you've been living in for all these years is no more. And
Hmm.
as you say, the shock of it. Because sometimes they lead you to transitions, like, oh, the ghost of Quentin will lead into why the ghost of Quentin. This is like you're like, I expected to go in and have a brandy with Roger, and you're suddenly like, what the heck? So
Yeah.
the creators are saying, now we're doing a mystery. And that gives it a real momentum to me. What happened? As opposed to some of like the parallel times or flashbacks, you're like, okay, I sort of get what they're doing here, but this is a very clear line. It's the introduction of Gerard and the idea of how that's going to leave through. And again, in terms of heroic storytelling, let's have a bunch of dead pirates come back from the grave
Yeah.
and attack and destroy everything.
Yeah.
Like what do you think? Like what were you thinking? Yet that's why we love Dark Shadows. It is they're like it is so daring and it is piratical, in fact,
Yes.
what
Yes.
they do.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of that. And I think weirdly the Mrs. Johnson being dead, leaning against the tree and just falling
Oh,
over
oh,
is
yeah.
one of the most upsetting moments in the entire series
Agree.
because we
Agree.
love that character and it's just so cold. It's just so this is what real death looks like.
Yeah.
And it was very upsetting.
Clarice Blackburn was amazing, and I agree 100%. It's a very upsetting
Yeah.
scene, because we've been with Mrs. Johnson all this time, and she's just, I don't know, it's just Mrs. Johnson's always there. She's just such an integral part of just
Yeah.
what's going on. She'll show up and throw off
Yeah.
some sarcastic comment or whatever, or she'll be part of a storyline, but she's just part of things always, and she's dead in such a cold way, and that Gerard in 1995 when we see him, he is so malignant,
Yeah.
so sinister. There's something so terrible about Gerard beyond just the way Jim Storm would, um, that sneer he would have was just really malevolent. And Daphne too, like a very Miss Jessel looking, with her
Yes.
pale, gaunt face. And I liked how, and then when we went into summer 1970, uh, there was an ambivalence about Daphne for a while until we started to see more of when she started resisting Gerard. At first, we were not sure of where Daphne's loyalties lie, and I kind of liked that about about Daphne, and in 1995 too. And we see Quentin again, who has not aged thanks to his portrait.
Yeah.
And he's about to destroy his portrait. If Barnabas and Julia hadn't shown up, he would have destroyed his own portrait. And he's still young, but he's mad too. Even Quentin has gone mad. And he's obsessed with this
Yeah.
ghost of Daphne. There's all kinds of crazy, and we see Hallie, this who's this girl who's
Yeah.
dancing with the ghost of David. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
mysterious stuff happening. It's really
Yeah, and
cool.
there's also like strangely poignant moments because
Yes.
these are the people they knew as young people or children. Here's my Carolyn Stoddard
Oh,
cup.
I love it.
When like Barnabas shows her the picture and says,
Yes.
That's you.
Yeah.
That's you."
Hmm.
And you see old Carolyn real sort of connecting with like a more innocent time, a time before the devastation of everything. It's very moving, you know.
Yes.
And the fact that the writers took the time to do that, to say like, we can slow down and just have a private touching, that's just touching moment, I think is so powerful.
That's some of Nancy Barrett's best work, I think,
100%.
where she's completely insane, but she's gone through this trauma of what happened. But there's this glimmer where that scene with her and Barnabas is so
Yeah.
touching, so moving. Barnabas kisses her on the forehead,
Yeah.
and then he ignites this spirit, and the old Carolyn
Yeah.
comes back. Some of the old Carolyn comes back, and she tries to help them by writing the list of clues before Carolyn dies too.
Again, which is
Devastating. Yeah.
unbelievable. One of the original family.
Yeah.
You're an actor, so it's hard to play crazy.
Oh
It's
yeah.
hard to play crazy because the
Yeah.
temptation is too much or too little.
Right. Yeah. It can come across as silly. And she
Yeah.
didn't.
No.
She felt genuine. She's been through some really bad stuff. I also loved the whole dynamic between Julia and Barnabas because Gerard imposes his will on Julia,
Yeah.
and Barnabas's staunchest ally turns on him. Julia betrays Barnabas and to the police. And Barnabas is almost destroyed, and Julia, remember somebody was upset because Barnabas. It was so funny. It was I think might have been in the wiki or it was somewhere. I was reading. I think somebody was upset that Barnabas killed a cop.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
He killed the cop, and somebody put Barnabas incapacitated the police officer. He did not
yeah.
incapacitate. He permanently incapacitated the police officer.
Yeah, but you're right about that moment with Barnabas and Julia because so much of the emotion around Barnabas
Mhm.
is about Julia, whether you
Yes.
whether you want to play shipping or not, which I like you do not, but just like never, never without you. And the
Yes.
fact that when the Leviathans really were pushing him toward it, that's how he was able to resist. Is
Yeah.
like there was some essential core of compassion or empathy toward Julia, which doesn't necessarily exist toward other characters, even characters we like Vicky or Carolyn. There's something about that relationship that is so they're comrades in war. They've been in the foxhole together, and that's what I see as the powerful connection between them.
Agree. I agree with you. And it's a great contrast when you look at the early Barnabas episodes and how his relationship with Julia in those episodes, and how that dynamic changes later. Yeah, they've again, but like you said, they've been in the foxhole together. They've been through some stuff, and you feel for Julie. She is in love with Barnabas, but it's this unrequited love. But they're allies. They're friends. I've not into the shipping thing with Barnabas and Julia. It's just because Barnabas doesn't. He clearly does not feel that way towards Julia, and it's heartbreaking. But he loves Julia. He cares about Julia,
Of
and
course.
he won't leave without Julia. He will do
Yeah.
whatever it takes to save Julia.
Let me ask you a controversial question.
Sure.
So Grayson Hall always said, God love her, that like she invented the fact that Julia was in love with Barnabas. She
Mhm.
decided to act that.
Yeah.
Yes, and as a writer, I have to kind of question that a little bit because I think it is in the script. I think it is sort of embedded in the origin of Barnabas story. It's sort of the Barnabas out of the box storyline.
Hmm.
I think it's there. I think it's readily apparent in the actual scene. So either they picked up on something she was doing, decided to incorporate it, or she began to play more strongly something that they had already written. What do you think?
I think it's a combination
Mm.
of both of those things. I suspect, as you know, I mean, this is a collaborative process. I suspect that the writers may have dropped something in there and Grayson picked up on it and leaned into it. And then the writers saw that she was leaning into it and then they leaned into it in response. So who did it first? I don't know. I mean, Grayson claims she came up with the idea. I don't know. Maybe she picked up on it in a sort of an unconscious way, but maybe the writers intended to do it. I don't think Sam was on the show yet at that point because I would say maybe they talked about it at home, kind of a
Yeah.
thing,
Over some cook over the stove. Yeah, and no
Yeah,
disrespect to Grayson Hall. I'm like
yeah,
the world's Grayson Hall fan, but like I'm a professional writer. So like
mhm,
I tend to always sort of bristle,
mhm.
at the assumption of ingenious ideas coming from actors as opposed to a combination or collaboration with, with writers and actors, which
I
is,
could
as you know, the way it actually works.
Right, and I could absolutely see, Joe Caldwell, who's brilliant, or Ron Sproat, dropping that into the scripts. It'd be an interesting thing to kind of go back and read those scripts and see if those things are dropped into the script. I suspect, I mean, in the lines and stuff, if we look at the delivery of the line versus the
Hmm.
line itself, and whether that's in the text itself. I suspect you're right. I think that's already baked into the script, and Grayson probably picked up on it and just kind of enhanced it in her
Right,
performance. And they
right,
probably saw that people were responding to that it played well, and they just kept leaning into it. So
right.
yeah, okay. So your number four was 1995. My number four is Quentin's Ghost and the Werewolf. For
Right.
me, I love that storyline. I always loved it when I was a kid. I was really intrigued by that. I was sucked into it in a big way. Part of it is because there were kids. The kids were exploring the West Wing of Collinwood, and they discover this room, and we get this these you get Quentin Collins for the first time, Quentin and Beth. And I loved I talked about Quentin. I picked him as my top number one ghost in Dark Shadows when we did the top five ghosts with Bobby Lugosi and Catherine Gonzalez. Quentin is such a great iconic character in Dark Shadows, and you can see right away why he is. I mean, he's just such a compelling, charismatic figure, and he's just having so much fun. He's sinister. He can be sinister as the ghost of Quentin, and he certainly can be scary, but he's also just really having a ball, pulling all the strings. And he's insidious because he just gradually, what he's doing just gradually becomes worse and worse as he, takes over Collinwood. And we also it's great stuff. And the kids are disturbing as they
Yeah.
become possessed by the ghosts and
Yeah.
are doing his bidding. And he's pleased when they do what he wants, and he's angry when they don't, setting David's arm on fire and all of this. And
Yeah.
and the human characters don't know what's happening. Nobody believes Maggie, so they're doing Turn of the Screw, and it's really the Dark Shadows version of Turn of the Screw is so much fun to watch. I loved it, and Mrs. Johnson plays a big role with Maggie. And then we have at the same time, and I loved it when they would do these like they'd
Yeah.
combine two storylines happening at the same time. The werewolf, we get
Yeah.
Christopher Jennings, the Lawrence Talbot of Dark Shadows coming into the storyline. Everybody Dan Curtis was resistant to doing a werewolf storyline, even though he was a big horror fan growing up. And he mentioned in one of the MPI interviews that he watched and loved the Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman movies as a kid. He thought werewolves were kind of hokey, and I'm glad they convinced him to go for it because you have to do a werewolf. If you did a vampire and you did Frankenstein, you have to do the Wolfman. You did Dracula, you did Frankenstein, you have to do the Wolfman. And I'm glad, and it was a hit. People loved the werewolf. Chris Jennings was such a tragic figure. Don Briscoe was so good in that role. I thought, you felt for Chris Jennings. Cutting in again, I would also be remiss in not mentioning the incredible Alex Stevens, the stuntman who played the werewolf when he was in his lupine form, and of course Vincent Lascalzo, the makeup artist who transformed Alex into the werewolf. And I love the thing, Barnabas at this point is no longer a vampire because of the Adam experiment, and Barnabas and Julia are trying to help Chris. Barnabas sees a kindred spirit in Chris Jennings, trying to help Chris. And you get these just great classic cinematic werewolf lore woven into the show with the full moon and werewolf fears silver and all of this, the pentagram, all of that stuff. Loved it in conjunction with the turn of the screw ghost stuff happening. First
Yeah.
big malevolent ghost storyline in the show, all setting up 1897 too.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Loved it.
Genius. I love it too. It's not one of my five, but it might have been number six,
Mhm.
because I love it so much. And also the sort of like England, the inclusion of a werewolf, as you say, also leads to like the best action sequences in all of Dark Shadows. We're jumping through windows, we're jumping down from, the landing. It's terrifying stuff. And the idea of, Barnabas with a cane battling a werewolf. It's like there's a reason they're models of that. It's such an iconic thing. It's like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It's like you get the two sort of like monstrous archetypes really going mano a mano. I think it's amazing. Now, is this also the Tom Jennings storyline? Refresh me. Is it
The
like this
Tom
also? Was that
Chris
the
Chris came in as after right Tom Jennings was resurrected by Nicholas Blair. He pulls
right?
the stake out. So
Right. Yeah.
there's one episode where they're both in the same episode, but then Tom is destroyed very shortly thereafter by
Yeah.
Barnabas doing the Peter Cushing with the
Yes.
candlesticks. So they kind of overlap briefly.
But it's where Joe
Oh,
Haskell
the
has the
dream.
dream
Yes,
to see both of them. And I thought, even now, I think that is one of the most coolest things ever. Because like
totally.
I love Joel Crothers and I love Joe Haskell as a great character. And how do you destabilize that character? Well, you toss Angelique at him and you give this terrible dream where people he knows, his cousin, I think it
Yeah,
is like, and there's the vampire cousin, there's the werewolf cousin, and you're trapped between them. Of course he's off to Wincliffe after
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That was great.
Yeah, it's so sad what happens to Maggie and Joe are my favorite Dark Shadows couple because they're so sweet and
Yeah.
they're so good together, and it breaks my heart what happens to them because they're
Mhm.
like these nice people that are thrust into this supernatural stew, and they become victims to this what's going on in this world. So Joe, gets carted off to Wincliffe, and Maggie, for the second time later on, gets carted off to
Well,
Wincliffe.
don't we like to imagine they got together at Wincliffe? They're
Yes,
like,
yeah,
whoa,
yeah,
Maggie, they run together in the middle of like the room where everyone's playing checkers.
yeah. They
And they
did
sort
do that in the those Big Finish audios.
That's
They
right.
had
That's
them
right.
reunite there, yeah, which I
Yeah.
like that idea. But yeah, so okay, so what about you? What's your number four? No, three rather. Sorry, three.
My number three is 1795, which maybe will place higher in many people's opinion. I love 1795.
Mhm.
It's like it's where again we have to talk about the bravery of the creators. It's like they've created this monstrous vampire character. They realize he's very popular. They realize this actor can play shades on shades on shades. And someone says, let's go back and do the origin story of Barnabas Collins.
Mhm.
That's amazing. So it's where you get to see where it all came from, and the costumes are great, and it's this epic operatic tragedy
Yes.
that plays out with this inevitability of fate because we kind of know how it's going to end. And that's where we begin the Josette Angelique love triangle. And, again, with my undying affection for Nancy Barrett, Millicent Collins just amuses me like nothing in the world. And her relation with Nathan Ford, which I think is Joel Crothers' high point, being able to play that rogue, is so delicious to watch. In the midst of glooming tragedy everywhere, there's those moments of lightness until that turns very dark as well. But more than anything, even more than sort of like how did Barnabas become Barnabas? Angelique.
Yeah.
It is the destabilizing force the narrative needed.
Yes.
And they cast Laura Parker. And I could watch Laura Parker in close up all day because she's able to convey so much wonder, terror, mystery, romance just here in the most amazing way. And I also love they play into something they rarely play in the show, which is class distinction. They played it a bit with Roger earlier. Remember Roger and Tony Peterson
Yeah.
would sort of like Tony would take jibe at his exalted aristocracy. But like when we introduce Angelique, she's a servant girl from Martinique, and all she wants to do is ride in a fine carriage. She just wants to be a lady. She wants to be respected and empowered as a woman. That is her motivation. And I find that so accessible and so unique for this show. Now, of course, then sort of the grand operatic tragedy, the sort of like the red velvet of the story takes over. But that initial motivation for empowerment in a society that does not empower her, I find very moving and very modern in a way, still when I watch 1795.
Excellent. 1795 is also my number three. I have a feeling our top three are going to be very, very much the same. Maybe not in the same order, but number three, 1795 for me, for the exact reasons you mentioned. It's operatic. It is an unending tragedy, but it's sad. I mean, such a sad storyline, but it's so engaging and so beautiful. I mean, in a sad way. I remember the first time I saw 1795, I was stunned. My jaw hit the ground because you see Barnabas as a human being when Vicky meets him outside the old house during the day and Sarah's alive and everything looks bright and happy and it's all the characters are played by the actors that we saw before, but they're playing their ancestors. How groundbreaking that was, and you can tell the cast was rejuvenated by that. You can tell they're having a great time. That's where Dark Shadows became a repertory company where they played all these different characters. And I read that ABC was really resistant to that idea, but Dan Curtis pushed back on that and said, no, the audience will understand that they're playing different characters, that they're playing ancestors, etc. And you get these great characters like Joshua Collins and Reverend Jerry Lacey coming back as Reverend Trask, who was such a
Yeah.
different character from Tony Peterson.
Yeah.
Abigail. Oh my goodness, Naomi. Oh, all of these amazing Nathan Forbes, etc. And Angelique. Oh my goodness, wow! You totally hit the nail on the head there with that. And I love the whole what you said about the class distinction there, and that frustration on her part, but also it also kind of always made me wonder, like, she's a witch. Why doesn't she use her powers to get what she wants? I just maybe Diablo said, well, no, this
There's
is
their limit.
it's
Yeah.
another punishment, for some reason I don't know. But yeah, it's and I love that whole that dynamic with Barnabas, Josette, and Angelique, and her and those scenes where she would run into Barnabas's room and they would and Barnabas would resist, but
Yeah.
he was clearly was drawn to her, and as things fall apart and you get this origin story for the vampire, which is again unheard of. When
Unheard
have
of.
you ever had an origin now it's like kind of commonplace when these streaming vampire based shows, etc., where you find
Yeah.
out how so and so or the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles, etc. Dark Shadows did that.
Invented it,
Yeah,
invented it.
yeah,
And one thing we have to sing from the rooftops always to the modern genre world is Dark Shadows did so much they invented so much.
yeah,
And respect must be paid to that. And the other thing I'll say that I sort of interesting about the Barnabas Angelique thing is like, you know, Barnabas obviously exploited this woman, had an affair with her,
yeah.
dumped her, but keeps in quote that, which is deplorable behavior. And I dislike Barnabas for that. Quentin is a total cat and roue, but I don't dislike him for it because he's not tortured by it. He's like, well, that's me, and it's that sort of archetype. It's very interesting the way I judge
Mhm.
their treatment of women very differently.
Interesting. Yeah, Quentin's pretty open about what kind of person he is. He's like, no,
Yeah, and
this
and he
is who I am.
also yeah, and David Selby performs it with a twinkle in his eye.
Hmm.
And Jonathan Frid is the most amazing actor. He does not twinkle. It is there was a glowering earnestness and seriousness to the way he approaches Barnabas and the storyline, which sort of you means you take his decisions like that more seriously. Whereas David Selby allows it sort of shrugs it off
Yeah.
with the charm.
Right, right, right. Let me ask you this. You say you didn't like Barnabas. Did you grow to like Barnabas after that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's not like I didn't like him. It's like it's when you have a character you love And
Hmm.
I love Barnabas Collins. It's the bedspreads, the pillows,
Yeah.
it's the iconic thing. It's when they challenge you in a way to
Yeah.
keep loving them, they
Yeah.
get more interesting. And so
Yeah.
there are times when Barnabas challenges me to love him, which I'll talk about a lot more shortly.
I
But
think
in a
people
way
are
that's
too
very,
for I agree with you. People are too forgiving sometimes, I think, of like they're like, "Oh, Angelique's really bad." And she is. So is Barnabas though. Both do bad things, that
yeah,
it's like, but you still love them because they also
yeah,
are not all bad.
right. And again, and we also love characters who are bad.
Yeah.
It's like we don't
Yeah.
only love lovable characters. It's the great sort of myth of
Yeah.
Hollywood. A note you hear a lot is like, can we make the character more sympathetic? To which I
Hmm.
said, no, you can make the character more human and more
Yeah.
complicated.
Hmm.
But the idea of audiences will only respond to likable, smiley characters is nonsense, or we wouldn't have drama, you
Agreed.
know.
Agreed. Yeah. Well said. Okay, what's your number two?
My number two is the introduction of Barnabas.
Haha, mine too.
Oh, there you go. And I took some notes on this because it's where to me the series first started going into truly uncharted, brave territory. And it has sort of three episodes that are absolutely essential to understanding the mythos of Dark Shadows for me. Episode 211, where Barnabas first appears, and you see how that creature emerges and insinuates himself into the life of Collinwood. Uh, Episode 341, which is Loathsome I Am and Evil. You can mock me for that, but leave my pain alone, where they kill Dr. Woodard.
Yeah.
This is such a seminal event for the entire series because Dr. Woodard is getting too close, and Julia is contriving with Barnabas to murder a human being in
Yes.
cold blood. Eventually, it's Barnabas who does it. And lines like that are what makes Barnabas Collins, as far as I'm concerned. The arias that Jonathan Frid was able to do, like when he talks about the old house, the building of Collinwood, Josette's death, those arias in this section, I'm like, I am all in. It's like Hamlet doing To Be or Not to Be. It's like
Mhm.
narrative can stop for what is poetry and passion. And the other episode is 364, which is where Sarah finally appears to Barnabas.
Yeah.
It is the climactic moment where Barnabas has been pushed too far and is about to kill Julia, who we know is going to turn to, with knowledge of the series, his most able ally. And they recite, as we've discussed before, what he used to teach her, the rhyme, when she was learning to read, which is that evil is wicked is well understood. The wicked are punished, so you must do good. And that to me is the reason of Dark Shadows. That's what it's for, is that idea that we see a world of characters we love always being challenged, supernaturally and non-supernaturally, just personally as human beings. And what are they going to do?
Yeah.
And so those three episodes in and of themselves, to me make this essential viewing. And of course, the sweep of Barnabas's character, which
Mhm.
is the most important event, from monstrous villain who imprisons and tortures Maggie, is biting Vicky and Carolyn, to emerging as a human being or a creature of great depth and compassion and understanding, all within this sweep. It's great.
Agree. 100%, everything you said, I 100% agree. This storyline could easily also be my number one storyline too. I love the introduction of Barnabas storyline. This is it encapsulates so much of what Dark Shadows is. This is where I feel like Dark Shadows truly became Dark Shadows in a way. As much I love the Laura storyline too, but this just really it really brought it home, and just all of those echoes of Dracula woven into this story. Jonathan Frid's Shakespearean delivery, even as a child watching that, Barnabas was scary. I had nightmares about Barnabas, but I also felt for Barnabas. I was sad, even though he was monstrous. He did terrible things, but those faraway looks where he would deliver those speeches and talk about where David would tell him about you can see the sunrise from this, room in the old house, and Barnabas would look and remember that talk about how he hasn't seen the sun in 200 years. It's so sad, you just felt for him. I was Dr. Woodard was talking about was when the blood samples were stolen. Maggie Evans' blood samples were stolen from his office, and Barnabas would talk. He was talking to Barnabas, and Barnabas talked about they were talking about the supernatural strength of this character who bent the bars to get into the office and all this. And Dr. Woodard said, "You almost sound as though you admire him." And Barnabas said, "No, in fact, I loathe him very deeply." And it's just he's talking about himself. Just those moments where it's like, wow, there's depth to this character. He is not just a predator. There's more to him there. Even early on, even then, you got glimmers of that. Thanks to Jonathan Frid would deliver those lines in such a because if you another actor may have delivered that line in a different way, in sort of maybe a cocky way or something like that. Or Jonathan just really nailed that. And Ron Sproat, who knew Jonathan from Yale, I'm sure was writing the lines. He knew what Jonathan liked playing that against that the evil. If he was an evil character, he'd like weaving in those moments. So he wrote it that way too. So eerie, so spooky. I also have to give a nod to the Jason McGuire blackmail plot, which happens concurrently with the Barnabas plot, although it does start I think 3 weeks before Barnabas. It features the incredible Dennis Patrick as Jason McGuire and also offers a great focus on Joan Bennett's Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, based directly on Art Wallace's own story, The House, which first appeared on the CBS anthology series The Web in 1954. Wallace used the story again for the NBC TV series The Goodyear Playhouse in 1957, but I just wanted to give a shout out to that plot line as well. It gets overshadowed by the Barnabas plot, which is happening at the same time. Understandably, it's Barnabas, but it's a great storyline. It's the last normal storyline, quote unquote normal storyline. And of course, we have Willie Loomis getting introduced there too. John Carlin, my goodness, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible performance. Because you go from Willie's just this punk crazy, well, the first actor to play Willie was, I didn't see him until I watched the pre-Barnabas episodes where he was real kind of rapey, kind of sleazy. And then John Carlin, I mean, he was good too. But when John Carlin came in, he played Willie. He's just this crazy, violent punk who, and Burke Devlin, roughs him up in The Blue Whale, and he deserves it. You want to see Willie kind of get roughed up by Burke Devlin, but then he's humbled by this supernatural force that he has unleashed upon the world. It's Willie's fault that Barnabas is out, and he becomes the vampire's thrall. And my goodness, how John Carlin played this character, the change in that character, and what he has done, what he has unleashed into the world, and trying now to protect Maggie or Vicky or David. It's really, really fantastic. And then they bring in Dr. Hoffman. Such creative, cool ideas. This character who's on now is trying to picking up on the clues, and she's figuring out what Barnabas is, and brilliant, super smart, this super smart doctor who's figuring out what Barnabas is. She sees he has no reflection in the compact, and she sets him up, when he comes into the room to kill her, and she confronts him and tells him that she can cure him. It's just such cool, great ideas that just keep you coming back and wanting more and more and more. And
Agreed. Just to hop in on Julia, it's like an old rule in Hollywood is like, beware the smartest person in the room. Always know who the smartest person in the room is when you're writing. The smartest person in any room is always Julia Hoffman.
Yes.
Because of exactly what you said, she's figuring things out. She's adding it up, and then she's taking action on it. Every time Dr. Hoffman enters, you go, she's going to lie to everyone, and she's going to be smart, and she's going to not get herself trapped in a corner.
Yep.
Amazing character.
Oh, for sure. And then I loved Sarah. And I always say House of Dark Shadows is what would have happened if Sarah didn't exist, because because Sarah she does represent sort of the lost innocence of Barnabas, the lost humanity of Barnabas, the lost past of Barnabas. And I love what you said about how when she finally does confront him, because you're waiting for that for weeks and weeks and weeks. Barnabas is desperate to see Sarah, and she'll appear to and even Juliet says she'll appear to everybody except for you. And when she finally does, she calls him out, and she tells him, and I won't come back until you are good. He can make that choice. She's basically tells him. And it's and I like what you said about how that is, and I've referenced that in a previous episode, how that is kind of the key there in Dark Shadows. Like, all of these characters, are you going to be good or are you not going to be good? Are you going to be good or are you going to be evil? And there are so many characters that are on that line and can go either way and do go either way depending on the
Yeah.
situation. So it's really fascinating, and just, I don't know, I love just great stuff with that storyline. Okay, what's your number one?
My number one is 1897.
Haha, mine too.
Because 1897 is, again, Count Hand of Count Patafi, exclamation point. Magda and Sandor, exclamation point. Julianka, exclamation point. Quentin Zombie, Quentin Werewolf. It is it to Garth Blackwood. It is to me from the high Wagnerian tragedy of the previous storyline we discussed, the origin of Barnum, we go into absolute extravagant musical comedy. And but like Sondheim musical comedy, where like there are serious issues, but it is constantly like burbling along with these amazing, powerful images and unusual storylines you don't expect coming in from left and right. Literally like Garth Blackwood slamming through the door, with chains, or Quentin Werewolf. It contains, for me, the two genuinely most frightening moments for me for Dark Shadows, which is Quentin Zombie trying to claw his way back into the grave, which chills my blood every time. And when Patafi curses Jameson with the kiss.
Oh
And
yeah,
that
yeah.
that kiss carries on, and David Hennessy with those black gloves channeling Thayer David
Yes.
is to me just magnificent. Laura the Phoenix, Mad Jenny. It's like everything is thrown in the most. It's so it's like it's a mad, 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 mad world. It's like everything is thrown in so excessively. And like my favorite actor on Dark Shadows is Thayer David. I mean, I love all of the actors, but whenever Thayer David is on screen, whether it's as Ben or T. Elliott Stokes, I love the man filling the screen, filling your heart or your mind with what he's doing at that moment. And he's never unsure of anything. And Count Patafi is his great creation. The way he will literally look right at you, like look into the camera and talk about destiny and fate, like he's talking right to you. I could watch 1897 for the rest of my life and never be bored.
100% on point. Everything you said. I agree with everything you said. 1897 is my favorite. It is Dark Shadows at its height. It's the writers firing on all cylinders. You had Sam Hall, Gordon Russell, and Violet Wells all working together like a well-oiled machine, and the three of them just worked so well together. You had Barnabas, Quentin, and Angelique all in there. Everything happening in such a fun, colorful way. It was scary. It was exciting. It could be funny too. You had like Carl and Pansy and things, witty, not funny in a like goofball way. I don't mean it that way. I mean like not at the expense of the drama, I should say. Let me put it that way. It was organic. You had amazing Laura Collins coming back. You had Quentin. Quentin as a ghost was great. He's even better when he's alive. You have
Yeah.
he's even it was fantastic. And all again, it's like with 1795, like they got to play new characters and they were kind of rejuvenated, the actors. It's kind of the same with 1897. It was like an entirely new group of characters, and their personalities were all different and fun, and they were just you had Joan Bennett as Judith and Louis Edmonds as Edward, John Carlin as Carl Collins, and David Selby as Quentin, as these siblings that were all
Yeah.
kind of at odds with each other. Grandma Edith with the will, all of that was just great. And Magda and Sandor, so much fun with Barnabas trying to stop Quentin
Yeah.
from killing David in the future. All good stuff. And then, oh my goodness, Count Patofi,
Yeah.
one of my favorite all-time characters too. Count Patofi was great. I love everything about Count Patofi. Aristide, everybody. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who doesn't like Count Patofi. Even friends that started watching Dark Shadows. My friend Ivan, he's watched segments of Dark Shadows. He'll just throw it on like Tubi or Pluto, and he'll watch like stretches of Dark Shadows randomly. And he became obsessed with Count Patofi to the point where he got all the costume parts and dressed up as Count Patofi for Halloween and sent me a picture. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen, and Ivan even bought the hand and everything. It was amazing. But Count Patofi was just sensational character. Thayer David's masterpiece. Agree. You had Catherine Lee Scott coming back as two characters. You had Rachel Drummond, which was a Jane Eyre type character, but then you had her come back as Lady Kitty Hampshire, which was super fun. Kitty Soames, who was kind of a schemer, like a different type of
Yeah.
character for Catherine Lee Scott.
It was great for our friend Kathleen Scott to play a different character.
Yes.
And Kitty Hampshire is, well, she's gorgeous. She's got great costumes,
Yeah.
and she's a gold digger. She's playing the angles against, poor Edward Collins. Louis Edmonds, one of his great performances as well in
Yeah.
that. It's so fascinating to watch because again, the domestic drama of Dark Shadows, it's like, Quentin versus Judith versus Edward. It's like all of that is as compelling to me as a zombie or a werewolf, because
Yeah.
they play it so well.
Agree.
And sets, the molecular energy just shoots around those sets when the actors are firing on all cylinders like that.
Yeah, excellent. And you had all that going on, but you also had the supernatural
Yeah.
stuff happening at the same time. The werewolf stuff was great. Quentin was a werewolf. It
Yeah.
was awesome because they set all of that up with the werewolf Chris Jennings, and you find out, oh, later on, oh, Quentin was Chris's and Amy's ancestor, and it was super cool. And Quentin to this day is in pop culture. Quentin is the werewolf, even though it was kind of a relatively short amount
Right.
of time that he spent
Yeah.
as a werewolf, if we think about it. But he's always the werewolf, is Quentin. But that was great. All of that was fantastic, and it's almost like. I know there were a few people like, oh, 1897 went on a little too long. I've had on the podcast. I honestly would have been okay with it if it went on even a
Yeah.
little longer than that, like a couple more months even. I would
Yeah.
have been cool with it. But yeah, 1897 to me, that's Dark Shadows when it hit the heights, and that's where it hit its highest ratings too,
Yeah.
as far as viewership as well.
Yeah, agreed. I just think it's like when people ask me, well, where should I start if I want to start Dark Shadows? I usually say the introduction of Barnabas, depending on who it is, but also, 1897 is just if you want full throttle Dark Shadows right in your face, this is the storyline to watch because it is, I think it's the apogee,
Yeah,
where everything works.
yeah. I've tried. I will say I have other friends who had asked me where to start a few years ago. This was around the time the Burton movie came out, and I suggested starting with introduction of Barnabas, and they found it repetitive in terms of
Yeah.
the repetition of what the characters say. Now, I love that storyline more than Oxygen. I do not find it repetitive. I was like, what? But I can see, I know it tended to be a bit more in terms of recapping stuff, but
Yeah.
it didn't bother me. 1897, by then, I think they dropped a lot of that. I don't think there was much of that going on because I think by then Sam Hall and Gordon Russell and Violet Wells were kind of like, well, if you missed an episode, too bad. You got to watch every day. Kind
Yeah.
of. That's thus kids were running home, so they didn't miss the episodes.
Yeah,
So
when I was doing my watch through during COVID, and my husband would be like, somewhere, and he during 1897, I would be like, "Oh my God, you'll never guess what just happened." He's like, "But did that happen like 3 weeks?" No, no, they just did this because it's constantly changing and surprising. And the most, again, it's like if there's a word to describe the process of Dark Shadows and his creative impulse, it's bravery.
Yeah.
The bravery of just saying, yes, we're going to do this. And yes, we're going to turn our, Quentin into a werewolf. And yes, yes, and it's the
Yes.
ultimate yes and show,
Yes.
you know?
It's
And
practically improv. It's
it is
scripted, but
it is practically improv. And sometimes it's,
yeah.
yeah. So, but again, that like as people of the theater, you and I appreciate that especially. The idea of like, yes, and go.
Yeah. Yep.
It
Yep.
doesn't always work,
Yep.
but at
Yep.
least you're trying. And you turn the channel over to CBS, what do you see?
Yeah.
You're not seeing the hand of Count, you're not seeing Aristide and, Patofi. You're not seeing the master and slave. You're not seeing any of that.
Right. Exactly.
So the
Yeah.
bravery, the bravery, the
Yeah,
bravery of
oh,
Curtis,
I
the
love
writer.
Aristide too. I'm so glad you mentioned Aristide. And we talked a little bit before, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you in our text, one of the topics you suggested was sort of some of the writers in Dark Shadows were gay. And I know you wrote in Ghastly Phantasms a little bit about this, but some of the subtext in Dark Shadows, but I think some of that was apparent with Count Patofi and Aristide, where there was a little bit of queer coding going on. And I know there was I guess there was some blowback you got on that, which is really unfortunate because it's
Yeah.
like, I tend to not really go deep into looking at what the writers were infusing into the show, etc. I look at the story itself. That's kind of how I look at it. But this stuff, people read different things into the show in different ways, and the writers were sometimes putting these things into the show. So I don't know if that's
Yeah, I mean,
something you want.
it's sort of interesting. It's, I mean, everyone looks at a work of art through their own eyes and
Mm,
they take from it what's significant to them. I know as a kid when I was first watching, and even now when I interpret things as being queer coded, I sort of like pay attention to that because it's slightly more meaningful to me because of who I am. When you look at like Jason McGuire and Willie and Barnabas, in that storyline, it's like Jason McGuire really is jokingly or not seriously pointing out to Willie, like, well, you're the housewife now, in this. And the master-slave relationship between Barnabas and Willie and that unequal power balance that then shifts, from first he's beating with the cane and then they're sort of allies as the story goes on is sort of inescapable. I mean, master slave, vampire thrall, however we want to interpret that sort of male-male relationship. Looking at it through a gay lens or a queer lens, you interpret it in a more romantic way, perhaps. And I don't think it's hard for me not to look at Count Petofi and Aristide as queer coded as well, because this beautiful boy, the way he talks about his beauty, Aristide is presented as sort of a foppish way and sort of like he's so beautifully dressed all the time. So it's easy for me to look at those relationships that way as adding another element to it for me, not for everyone. And I respect anyone who says like, oh, I don't see that. That's fine. Well, then allow me to see it if I choose to.
yeah, exactly. And I think that was when I had Madeline Marks on the show. He said Dark Shadows really lends itself to different interpretations, and that's totally valid. And I totally can see that, especially with Count Patofi and Aristide. It's implied, I think. But anyway, yeah, it's just, fans can be. Here's the thing with Dark Shadows fans. Some of them have their own kind of ways of looking at things, but it's important to be open-minded to other people's takes on Dark Shadows. And that's why I like having different viewpoints on the show and hearing different takes on the show. Just because you may not agree with somebody's take on it doesn't mean that they're negating your take on something. So,
Right, and you and I have lived in the Dark Shadows world for a while, and
mhm.
we know that there are certain writers or critics who are very doctrinaire
Yeah,
about this is what Barnabas means, or
yes,
this is what Barnabas and Julia are about, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh, that's what they're about to you. To me, they might be about something else, and that's why art exists,
yeah,
right? For us to
yeah,
look at it and look at it from our own lens. You take that diamond and you shift the facets light up differently for different people. So anyone who says to me, "No, that's wrong about Dark Shadows," my response is, well, no, it's not wrong. It's just different. I may be wrong about facts, about lines, about episode numbers, but what speaks to my heart about Dark Shadows is true to me.
right. Excellent. Well, I think that is a great place to end the episode. John, what do you think?
I'm delighted with that. It was such a pleasure doing it again. This is like I'm getting in touch with what matters.
Well, it's been such a pleasure having you back. I had a great time also hanging out with you last summer at the Dark Shadows Remembrance weekend. So hopefully we can be doing that again sometime sooner rather than later. I hope, fingers crossed. So thank you for coming back onto the show with me. And I'm very excited to see what future projects you have in store. And thank you again, John, for being on the show.
Pleasure.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.